Hi, Jim. How are you? Oh, no, I can't hear him.
Hey, Leah, I'm doing pretty well. I just had my mic muted. Sorry. How are you?
We are wonderful.
Excellent.
Probably did.
No, I unlocked it. Oh, no. Jim, we're going to give everybody another minute to arrive.
Okay. Sounds good.
That's great. It's been 80 minutes. Oh, that's good. Absolutely.
All right, it's 6:33. I'd like to start promptly, only 3 minutes late. So tonight's agenda is purely a workshop, which is the fifth one, Jim. Do you believe it's the fifth one?
It's hard to believe. Time flies when you're having fun.
This is true. We'll go through a quick introduction on Leah Hitchin. I'm the town planner. We have Leon Lazinski, the planning board administrator, Heather Raposa, our recording secretary. We have Jim Knott, zoning board chair, Dave Garso, planning board member, Kate Wilson, planning board member, Sue Horowitz, zoning board member, and Ben Farrell, zoning board vice chair. With that being said, Jim Reardon from Weston and Sampson, why don't you take it away?
Sure. I think you might need to enable me to share.
That is true, and I started doing that, and it looks like Zoom has been updated with all these weird enhancements.
Match all the goofy new things that Microsoft does now. Okay. Can you all see that?
Yes, we can.
Great. All right, so this evening, obviously May 16th, we're continuing, as Leah mentioned, to do the required revisions to the zoning ordinance and subdivision regulations. And so we will proceed. First, a brief overview of what we're going to do tonight. So I wanted to take a couple of quick minutes to talk about legislative changes that are in process, because while they aren't immediately important, they will be important for the future as we get into tier 2 and particularly in tier 3, if they go through the way they appear to be moving. We'll go over zoning regulations, and in particular, we're going to focus on special use permits. We can say a few quick things about subdivision regulations and go over any questions that may have arisen as a result of reviews that you might have completed since the last time we took a look at subdivision regulations and since our last workshops. And then we'll talk about wrap up and next steps. Before I dive in, does anybody have anything else that they want to bring up that isn't on this list?
They're very quiet, Jim. No.
All right. So really quickly here, I'll do an overview of our approach and status where we are with things. So the approach, as you know, is a two-tiered review of legislation and corresponding updates to that. Tier 1 is what we're working on now. Those are things that take effect more immediately than the tier 2, and also involve significant decision making on your part, that if you don't make the decisions now, your town would potentially be stuck without rules and regulations, because things revert to the state legislation if you haven't made decisions, and some of the state legislation requires that you have made the decision. So you'd be in a situation where you didn't have, from a legal standpoint, policy. So we take care of the tier 1 stuff first to avoid that problem, and then jump into the tier 2 things. We're working with Rhode Island housing templates that were developed a few months back and are designed to help municipalities move through this process. Of course, there are various points along the way here for public input. Your meeting tonight is certainly an example of that, but there'll also be hearings to adopt these rules and regulations and updates to your ordinance. Local board and commission input, which is of course what we're involved in now, and sort of the basic steps of how we get to completed tier 1 review and then jump into tier 2 next, is that we do a local regulatory review, which has been in process and is more or less complete at this point. Draft regulatory language, part of which we'll be presenting tonight, and then public hearings for adoption. So as I mentioned, there are a few legislative changes that are in process currently. They have some of these, or most of these, have gone through the House. They passed through the House, as is noted in the current status, in that first bullet in the current status. Most of them have gone through the House. Some of them remain on the floor and are in the process of being passed. They've been introduced to the Senate, and then we anticipate that the Senate will pass most of these, and then will ultimately require municipalities such as yourself to make additional changes. So what are the changes that are in process? Well, they're listed up top here. So There is inclusionary zoning, which is not applicable to Portsmouth, at least for the time being, because that's not something that you have in your current policy. There are technical amendments to the Subdivision Act. And what we mean by technical amendments is they primarily focus on fixing things that were done, basically errata from the last time through. There are a couple of exceptions to that, but generally speaking, these are technical amendments to fix errors that were in the Subdivision Act as a result of the amendments that were made last year. And then there is adaptive reuse, and there's, I don't know, it's been a little bit of a confusing process with the adaptive reuse. The General Assembly is trying to address what is a fairly significant problem with the way the adaptive reuse was adopted. They made some changes to it that didn't quite fit the bill, actually added some more confusion to the process. These had to do with the amount of density that you could have in adaptive reuse and what certain density requirements were. Those are in the Senate currently, and we're hoping that the Senate improves what was passed so that it'll be correct this time. We'll keep you informed as this goes on. And so we just wanted to make you aware of it now, because some of these changes will actually need to be addressed in subsequent revisions to your subdivision regulations and your zoning. So we'll probably address these in Tier 3 when we get to the full rewrite of the subdivision regulations and the zoning. Before I move on, I know this is kind of a lot of information. Before I move on, are there questions about this?
No questions, but I do think that was a very good summary of what has been happening in the last few months up at the State House, Jim.
Thanks, Leah. All right, so Tier 1 bills, these are the same that we had listed out last time and where we're focusing. A lot of tonight will focus on special use permits and making sure that you folks are equipped with specific and objective criteria for special use permits that come through, you know, for new development and so on, and you know, redevelopment. Of course, we've already talked about subdivision of land and the changes that we think are necessary to that. And you folks have our revisions to that, and we're hoping that you're taking a look at those and seeing if you have additional revisions that are necessary to make for the Tier 1 updates. Again, you'll have another bite at this apple when we do Tier 2 and Tier 3. But, you know, we want to make sure that you've had a chance to review them as well. And adaptive reuse, as we talked about a moment ago, is undergoing some changes. But of course, you already have updated regulations for that as well. Tier 2 bills include Land Use Court, the LMI Act, changes to SHAB, TOD pilot, comprehensive plan changes, noticing requirement changes, and changes to definitions. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on these, but just as a reminder, these things are coming up next. So zoning updates. So key new things that have been sent out to you all and that we're going to take a little bit of time reviewing this evening include adaptive reuse definition that was added to Article 2. Then Article 5 use regulations. This adds adaptive reuse as permitted. Special use permits. So this requires the establishment of specific and objective criteria for special use permits. I know we've talked about that a bit before. We're going to get into it in some detail tonight. And that's really where we're going to focus most of our time tonight. We think that's where most of the meat of these changes are, and the most critical things for you all to think about tonight and as you're reviewing the new materials. Land development projects. So this amends how land development projects are processed and requires zoning initiative incentives for land development projects to be identified. And then Article 11, which enables the DPR process and identifies permitting authority, and then also enables the unified development review process in the zoning ordinance. So development plan review and unified development review. And those are both discussed in the updates to Article 11. Also, as a reminder, in the materials that we've sent, and this legend, I guess, if you will, symbology legend, is included in each of the updates too. It's in the header, so if you're looking for it as you're going through, you'll be able to find what these changes mean quickly, and what this color coding system means. So red language comes directly from the state law and has to be inserted into regulations and enforceable policy as written. We don't really have any flexibility in that, except for, very minor changes, like minor changes in grammar, or, maybe switching one word for another where the meaning is exactly the same, adding tenses and things like that. But other than that, that language has to stay as it is in the state law. And we've done our best to do that in the revisions that we sent you. Language in black is derived from best practices. So it's language in black, and it's also underlined as this is. And so what we mean by best practices is that we've taken a look at what other municipalities do. We've taken a look at the available literature on these topics, and we've tried to include information or revisions in your enforceable policy that addresses these issues that are required by the new bills, the new laws, but how you actually address these things from municipality to municipality was not necessarily specified. So that's the language that's in black with underlines. And then there are a variety of color codings. Yellow, which is cross-reference. Blue, which is a decision point for the town and the planning board. Pink, which is for future review once the tier 1 edits are complete. And then green, which is suggested criteria from the Rhode Island housing templates. And now I'm going to exit this PowerPoint for a few minutes, and I'm going to bring up the part that has the part of these regulations that has to do with the special use criteria.
This is so exciting.
It's like unwrapping a Christmas present, isn't it?
Oh my God, yes.
Well, you can see all the beautiful bows here that we've inserted and so on and so forth. So I'm going to take you through some of these changes fairly quickly, and then we're going to get into the special use criteria and, specific and objective criteria that we've tried to add.
And before Jim really takes a deeper dive into this, everybody has been forwarded this information, and, over the course of the next couple weeks, please look at this and, after we review, think about it and make comments and get it back to myself so we can get the information to the Weston and Sampson team.
Yeah.
All right, Ben's asking a question.
Okay.
June zoning,
Yes.
we use this stuff.
Not quite, Jim, Ben is asking if for our June meeting, we'll be incorporating these special use criteria.
I assume not, because there's been.
The answer is no, because we don't have it actually, approved yet.
The council.
Oh, I understand the question. Will it be effective at that time? And yeah, as Lee mentioned, the answer is no. It'll be a couple of months out from that.
Practical perspective, do we fall back on the regulations that exist?
Well, right now, if a use is not specifically in the table as a yes or a no, then it is allowed by right unless you have actually approved special use criteria. Is that correct, Jim?
Yep, that's basically correct.
Which is why we're really trying to get these done. I was kidding around when I said this is our 5th meeting. We're trying to get this through as quickly as possible. It is taking a little bit longer than anticipated, but we are cranking through this, believe it or not.
That's a 180, what it formally was, right? Use was not listed, it was not allowed. Or you could take something that was close to it, i.e. a pickleball court, sort of like a tennis court,
Mhm.
go that way. But now we're saying, well, it's not listed, it's allowed, correct? So it's almost a 180.
Correct.
Like
Correct.
regulation. Okay, but that's in effect now.
Correct.
Yep. And I think I want to reiterate here that what we're doing is trying to respond to the tier 1 requirements and get that out of the way. And then we'll come back and clean up things that maybe, you're not that happy with, but weren't a tier 1 requirement or a tier 2 requirement. We'll do that in tier 3. We'll still have to adhere to, to these new laws, but we'll take a deeper dive in and, try and be a little more thorough in the way we address things. Right now, we just want to make sure that, frankly, that the emperor is wearing clothes and that you're not stuck without specific and objective criteria for things that are special use permits and then required to accept developments that maybe you wouldn't want to see.
They get it loud and clear.
All right, cool. All right, so as I mentioned, I'll run through a lot of this fairly quickly because it's a little less consequential and I want to get to the meatier stuff for you, given the amount of time we have. So this first part up here is just pretty straightforward language, nothing too critical. As is the same with this language. Red language here is required by the new state laws, and there are a few places in here that are listed in blue where you'll need to insert, what it is that you folks want to include as a town. So time periods, who the local board is, that sort of thing that's doing the reviews. Let's see, this was struck, I believe, because it was not specific and objective, as noted here.
Those are all the former criteria for special use permits.
So what's the new criteria?
We're developing them now.
Yep, they're coming right up.
Mhm.
Okay, again, pink is for review. So something that we identified for review for the future. Not quite yet, because again, we're on tier 1, but that we'll tackle maybe in tier 2 or tier 3. One thing that I wanted to, so now we're getting into the criteria for the special use permits that we've all been awaiting. And the first item that we have in here is residential, and it focuses on renting rooms. This is something, the criteria for these that we've included and that we've taken basically from best practice. We think in a lot of cases, these criteria are very, I don't know, binary in a sense, and that they are things that, you wouldn't want to have rooms being rented without these criteria being satisfied. And so therefore, you could probably make a lot of these things just plain yeses or nos in given districts. And so we're not going to do that now because it's a little bit of a bridge too far for tier 1, but we will revisit this in tier 2, we think.
But Jim, before you run, just as a matter of, while we're right here, number 4. Am I reading that correct, or is that like should it be the total number of bedrooms? Says there should be no more occupants in the dwelling unit than the total number of rooms.
Yeah, that is that
It
did
doesn't
come
make
from
sense
best.
because I'm not gonna have someone sleep in my bathtub.
Right. So really, and we could talk about changing this a little bit too, because I had sort of the same thought about it that you did. The number of occupants is usually based on the number of bedrooms, and it's usually 2 occupants per bedroom, which may or may not relate to total number of rooms. I think some other jurisdiction was using total number of rooms as a proxy for the thing that I just said, and for probably, I'm guessing that you're thinking something similar.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, so these basically repeat down through each one of these, having to do with renting rooms. Let's see, in apartments and condominiums, I don't think we had any changes to that. There is this section here that talks about what the application for this use should include. And we think it would be a good idea to revisit this in tier 2 or tier 3. But for now, it seemed like, it was good enough for tier 1. No changes in this part. So this one for open space, we eliminated the one criteria that was in here because we felt like it was not specific and objective. So it says open space shall be provided in appropriate places, and every effort shall be made to preserve wooded areas or other site amenities. It's not really possible to attach a specific and objective criteria to this the way it's written. So we left the open space as something that we know you want to include here so that it gets preserved, but we struck this item, which made it unclear. Where we had other items that we felt were not specific and objective criteria, we struck those as well, and generally made a note like this, not specific and objective. Okay, so now we get into hotels and motels. And these are all criteria that come from best practice. We'd ask that with all these criteria, you know, for best practice, that you take a look at them and think about whether they're appropriate for Portsmouth or not. Places of worship, same sort of thing. So green means that the suggested criteria, the best practice criteria, came from the template. So these were things that were included in those Rhode Island housing templates. There are places here for you to add certain parameters. So there shall be a number, some number of foot landscape buffer along any lot line. So these are things that we would ask you to think about, and think about what, you know, what amount you might like to include. Private or public schools, not conducted as a private business. So of course we listed criteria here. There's a point later on where we said, you know, we're going to suggest in a future tier combining certain special uses. So this is one of those. This gets, and you'll see later on, this gets combined with training facilities, vocational training facilities, I think. So cemeteries and mausoleums. There wasn't anything in the template that we could use, and we did some research on specific and objective criteria, and we're able to pull these from a couple other Rhode Island municipalities. I think this one might come from Situate, although Situate isn't named in here. This one, however, comes from Tiverton. As is noted in a couple of places throughout this, you'll see references to Tiverton. So these are for your consideration. You don't have to pick between these. We could do some sort of hybrid or something, but they're here to give you some idea of what specific and objective criteria might look like for cemeteries and mausoleums. So there, we knew that you folks as a town wanted to include specific and objective criteria that would help you out, particularly with the gas facility on Old Mill Lane. And so that was something that was in mind. So these specific and objective criteria are suggested for that.
So let me stop you there a minute.
Sure.
So how do you provide for the future? The future is very difficult to predict. Okay, you know, we're now dealing with wind turbines, we're dealing with solar farms, all of which are electrical generation stations, correct? What happens, so in Georgia, it's my understanding, I have a brother who lives down there, that the latest thing down there they're building is these miniature nuclear power plants.
Yep, microfission facilities.
Right, so what, is there anything we can put in the ordinance that might be generic enough but specific enough where if something like this pops up in the backyard, it's not one of these, well, it's not listed, and so I guess it's allowed type thing. Because again, difficult to predict the future, but we've got to have something there for future. Now, just give the house away.
Yeah, that's a great question, because, you know, frankly, we expect microfission will come up, and at some point, you know, fusion is getting to scale now too, and that's probably another thing that's likely to pop up. Frankly, as is direct air capture of carbon. That's another thing that, you know, I don't know that it'll necessarily be coming to Portsmouth, but theoretically it could. So I would recommend that we look at those kind of uses, probably in tier 3. And we get through the tier 1 and tier 2 stuff, now get it out of the way, and then take another look at tier 3 when we're doing tier 3. And that will give us a little more time to think about those things. It's unlikely that anything like that, and unless you've heard about somebody considering this specifically for Portsmouth, it's unlikely that anything like that is going to come up over the next couple of months as an application. And so I think you're safe holding off.
All right, thanks. I know a little bit of alternate energy, solar farms, one nuclear power plant. I think the impact on Portsmouth would be indirect. I don't see any of those things directly being installed in Portsmouth. But we're gonna have landfall considerations, infrastructure considerations, backup, alternate energy. The third way here is from an information source.
I'm afraid I wasn't able to, it sounded like a comment more than a question, but I'm afraid I wasn't able to hear that clearly.
You can continue, Jim. One of the residents was speaking about just being a good resource for that sort of information.
Oh, good. Okay, private nonprofit libraries and museums. So again, this is some best practice criteria that's included here. And this was a special use that was identified in your use table. So, you know, we wanted to include something for that. Hospitals, clinics, infirmaries, nursing homes, etc. So we think that at some point in the future, it would probably make good sense to separate out hospitals from the rest of these uses, just because they're significantly different or have the potential to be significantly different than a clinic or infirmary or a nursing home. But for now, we left them there, given that this is tier 1. And, you know, we don't want to get too deep on changing things around at this point. We want to make sure you're ready, you know, that you're in good shape to address things that that may be coming along due to the changes in requirements from the state. So going forward, we think you know, it might make sense to split these out. But for the time being, what we said here was that these sorts of facilities, this group of facilities, should include public water, should meet all federal, state, and local requirements, should include a parking plan, and should include some sort of a traffic assessment if they are serving 11 or more clients. One thing I wanted to point out here is that at some point we may want to move the item 2 here, meeting all federal, state, and local requirements, up to a sort of introductory chapter or general, not chapter, paragraph, introductory paragraph up at the beginning of the special uses. Because we think, you know, that it's probably a good idea that all the special uses, when they're coming in, have already you know, started looking at their federal, state, and local permitting requirements. Next one on the list here is daycare centers, and these criteria came from the templates. K, this is the trade, professional, or other for-profit school for gain that I mentioned a little while ago that might be good to combine with public and not-for-profit schools. But we would recommend doing that at some future point in time. And that for now, what you do is include the same criteria for each of these. country clubs, golf, swimming, tennis, and other outdoor recreational facilities. The criteria are listed here for that. And these address noise standards, lighting, and trip generation related to traffic. We know that agricultural promotion, special events, and farm breweries have come up a couple of different times in Portsmouth. And so, so there are specific and objective criteria listed for each of these uses. For antennas, these criteria have been included, which were, I believe, previously in your special use criteria. So these already had basically special, specific and objective criteria. Laundries and dry cleaning plants. Here's another place where I might suggest that the two uses get split up at some point in the future, even though we haven't symbolized it that way. Dry cleaning plants, as I'm sure you know, use certain pretty high intensity chemicals sometimes, and these can be hazardous chemicals, whereas laundries typically are, it's just a laundromat, place where you, an individual would go and take care of their clothes. Regardless of that, we didn't try and split it up at this point, given that we're in tier 1 here. And so we just included specific and objective criteria, including a requirement that they may only use solvents which are non-flammable and will not support combustion, or non-flammable at ordinary temperatures and only moderately flammable at higher than ordinary temperatures. So that kind of language that comes from federal hazard requirements related to certain classes of uses. So we figured it was appropriate here too. Extractive industries and earth removal. You folks have an earth removal ordinance, and so basically we refer back to that. Mass storage of fuel in tanks not exceeding 50,000 gallons. Again, this one, this is something that gets regulated at state and federal levels. So, so we tried to drive applicants back to those requirements, and then included a couple other requirements in here as well that wouldn't be in state or federal, but that we felt might be important for you folks in Portsmouth. So storage of any kind is prohibited outside of fences or walls. No items stored within 10 feet of the fences or walls may exceed the height of the fence or the wall. So, so that the storage is screened. And storage areas should be located in the rear of the lot so that somebody can't put these things out front. And any structure shall be located in the front of the storage area to obscure the view of the storage from the street, in compliance with the front yard and underlying zoning district.
Jim, question on that.
Sure.
Mass storage of fuel in tanks not exceeding 50,000 gallons. Is that 50,000 gallons per tank? Or is that mass storage totaling 50,000 gallons regardless of the number of tanks? In other words, what's to stop somebody from putting two 50,000 gallon tanks and say, well, it says tanks not exceeding 50,000 gallons. So should it be cumulative? I went through this on the Old Mill Lane thing with the tanker trucks and the amount that would store there. And it was each tanker truck holds so much, but total on the property would be quite a bit. So I'm just wondering if that particular thing needs to be a little bit more specific.
We can certainly do that. We were looking at this as per use because these, the folks who would be making these applications are applying for the use of as a whole for their property and not for, you know, say an individual tank or something. But certainly don't mind making this more specific if that's been something that's been a problem for you folks in the past.
Jim,
Absolutely.
we also have a couple cases in the town where there's a propane fill station in front of the front. Yeah, just to allow access. And would this prohibit that?
So it already exists and they're permitted?
It already exists. It's a case, you know, if I want to take my barbecue propane tank to the Ace Hardware, well, their tank is in their parking lot. So I'm able to get my little propane tank filled from their larger tank.
But we did that. That came before us.
Correct, but I'm wondering,
Would that prohibit it the way it's, yeah,
that this would prohibit
that's
future.
located in the front, yeah. Right. Good point.
So I think those, if I'm understanding correctly, and feel free to, you know, chime in here, Leah, in particular. I believe that those would just become non-conforming uses, right?
Yeah, legal non-conforming uses, but if a new one were to be proposed that wanted to compete with Agway or Cumberland Farms, then that could be a situation we have that we have to deal with. So yeah, I agree with Jim Knott in that we should probably add some specifics to the storage of fuel. I think that would probably help us out maybe in the future.
Perhaps by specifying that a tank under a specific size could be in front of the building.
Right, we could make those conditions or specifics as we work along here, but this is what this conversation's for you to pick up on these. Yes. And Jim Reardon even noted it on the side. He added a little note to talk about further about this.
Yeah, I would recommend that if you set a threshold under which it's, you know, I don't know, allowed by right or something like that, that you still make sure that folks have their federal and state permits for those things, because of course there are those requirements too, and that you wouldn't allow them until, you know, they presented those. All right, next one on the list here is limited light industry. This already had specific and objective criteria, so we just left it as is basically. There was one item here that we felt was not specific and objective, and so we struck that. Then we get into retail and consumer services. This is an interesting section because I think in later stages of the rewrite, you know, like tier 3 or something like that, we may want to do a little horse trading between some of these uses and other uses that you have, or split some things out. And you'll see what I mean here in a couple of minutes. But the first one here that's listed is store for retail or merchandise with outdoor displays. And so we included some specific and objective criteria for that from best practice. The thing I was just referring to has to do with marinas, including sale and repair. And there's, I forget exactly where it is in the set of, you know, the set of regulations, but there's another thing that's very closely related to marinas or boatyards or something of that nature, where it might make sense to combine the two things. Store for retail, sale, and merchandise, such as but not limited to lumber yards and building supply yards. So we figure one of the main things here, and something that you'll probably want to consider for the future, is making sure that these things have appropriate screening. And this is another one that could probably be combined with some other uses. Telephone exchanges, but not including service of storage yards or microwave transmission facilities. We would suggest considering elimination of this as a special use, either allowing it or disallowing it, and probably taking it out of, the S category. Outdoor trade shows. This has this is another one where we think, it might make sense at a future time to consider the elimination of it, that it could probably be combined with some other uses of some sort. And that basically finishes off special uses. Questions or comments?
You ran into the project again, the storage, there's like a number of storage units. It doesn't fall directly under any of these.
Like tradesman centers.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I couldn't quite hear the question.
Sue had her own specific project in town where she proposed tradesman centers. I believe it was a 4-unit.
Yeah. There's nothing directly in the zoning code that related to storage.
That's Jim and myself have specifically discussed the existing use table and the uses that are in the use table now. And we have decided that we right now are dealing with the uses, and that will be in tier 3. We get questions about tradesman centers all the time, and that's definitely a use that needs to be added. But for the immediate getting past the tier 1, answering yes, no, special use permit required, that's what we're dealing with right now. But absolutely, tradesman centers is not addressed at all in our use table. Hold on, I'm gonna, Emil, I'm gonna turn on the, why don't you go right up to the microphone so everybody online and Jim can hear you?
And you'll have to state your name and your address for the record, please.
Emil Sapolo, 20 Nina Road, Portsmouth. My question is, will tonight's meeting address low-income housing at all?
Absolutely not.
It will not.
No,
Fine, thank you.
thanks.
All done.
That was a very quick question. Thanks, Emil.
Yeah. So, do you want to continue at this point, Leah?
Yeah, are there any other questions regarding special use permits and the required criteria? We're getting no's.
Okay.
Poor Emil, he's leaving the meeting. I don't know.
Okay, so we have 4 other pieces of revisions to articles that we can go through kind of quickly. I know we're getting to our witching hour here, correct?
5 minutes, Jim.
5 minutes, all right. So,
Maybe before we go on.
Hold on, Ben has a question.
with
sure.
Special use permit criteria. Things come to mind that aren't in the current table, like a zoo. Would a zoo be covered by anything that's in there currently? Sort of council.
Jim Knott made a a very snide comment, and we're not gonna say that. But,
Oh,
Uh-oh, we're getting spicy. So
again,
those are,
that sort of thing goes in line with the tradesman center. Do you want a petting zoo, a zoo, a town council meeting zoo? I mean, we can get really defined. Petting zoo, yes. That is something we could add again in tier 3. But we are simply addressing the existing uses listed in the current use table. Yes, but zoo. Surprised we haven't gotten a use for a zoo.
Jesus, when we have over on East Main Road, there's that farm with the goats and stuff. West Main.
I think that's Middletown, Ben. That's on the line though, that's close. All right, go on, Jim.
all right. We're having good fun here. All right, so this section has to do with adaptive reuse. It's Article 2. It's an addition to the definitions. It provides a definition of adaptive reuse. As you can see, it comes from the templates, and so it's underlined accordingly.
That mandated by the state?
Yes.
Okay, so let me ask you a question. How does that play into, and we have a specific example here in town, which was shot down.
Jim, can you hear Jim? Can Jim hear Jim?
I actually can.
Okay.
See, you can hear me. So we have actually a specific, development in town where there was a building that was a restaurant many years ago and eventually turned into a daycare center, totally surrounded by residential buildings. And, daycare center went away a number of years ago. Building kind of sat abandoned, and then, one of the local banks came and wanted to put a bank in there. The thing is it was listed as residential property, and our ordinance says you cannot have commercial in residential.
Yep.
So if this particular thing is now in place, this particular ordinance, does that mean that that building could be changed and adapted for commercial use? Even though it's listed as a residential zone?
So I don't remember them off the top of my head, Jim, but there are some requirements in adaptive reuse that you're also supposed to include certain things like residential. And so I don't know that sort of strict conversion from daycare to a bank in a residential zone would be allowed.
Okay, that would be a concern. I could understand if there was adaptive reuse the other way, going from commercial to residential, especially in this town. But to go from residential to commercial in certain areas, I think that would be a little bit iffy. So, okay.
I think a better example of what I could imagine for adaptive reuse is like the Coggeshall School,
Right.
going from school to affordable housing, or
We don't know what that property is zoned as, do we?
not off the top of my head.
Bet you it's residential. Which is great.
Go ahead, Jim.
Okay. All right, so that's the adaptive reuse one. Do a couple other of these, so. This one also has to do with adaptive reuse.
Oh, and this
And-
includes eligibility for adaptive reuse.
Into residential, okay, yeah, there you go.
And it does address some of those requirements that I mentioned.
Yeah, this looks to be from commercial to residential or mixed.
Yep. And the typical sort of thing that the state was envisioning with adaptive reuse seems to be mixed for, mixed use of residential and other.
Right.
So this is that funky density calculation that I mentioned earlier. So we're stuck with it for the time being, but it's probably getting changed. And you'll notice it says here, for projects that meet the following criteria, residential density shall be no less than 15 dwelling units per an area, where the project is limited to the existing footprint, except that the footprint is allowed to be expanded to accommodate upgrades related to building fire code and utility requirements. This is part of the funky density calculation that I mentioned. There's some more to it as well, but just keep that in mind as you're reading through this, that this is something that we're required to do at the moment. There's no leeway on it. I'll pull up another one. Special use we already covered, so this is LDP. Land development projects. And you can see there's certain strike through and underline. This is to match the new requirements in the state legislation. So again, this is stuff you are required to include, basically. And then there's a spot down here. In reviewing, hearing, and deciding upon a land development project, permitting authority is empowered to allow the following zoning incentives. And so the idea here is that you include certain incentives. The town of Lincoln had some that that I think we were going to pull for you folks. They're not listed in here yet. But in any case, you're required to include incentives for these sorts of projects at this point. See, this is Unified Development Review and development plan review. And again, you can see there's strike through of certain text. Again, this is all essentially required. There's not a lot of room for changing things around. So some of these things that are listed in yellow, there may be references in other parts of your enforceable policy that need to get double checked just to make sure that the things are in agreement. So that will get done as well. And that is it for this evening. Any questions before we sign off?
There are no questions, Jim.
All right.
That was
I think
very,
go ahead.
that was very helpful. The more I keep reading it and reading it, the more it's ingrained in my head.
Yeah, it is a little convoluted when you're first looking at it, isn't it?
Well, what makes it more convoluted is when the state adds language that is super complicated and now they have to fix it themselves.
Yeah, because they got it wrong.
Adding language that we know is going to be cut, modified.
Yep. And it's, again, it's a good thing that we have this sort of tiered process and we're going to do a deeper dive on it later because by the time later comes around, we should have a very good understanding of what the state is changing and what they're not, because they'll either have passed it or they won't have.
Well, Jim, thank you for spending your evening with us.
The pleasure is all mine.
And we will probably see you back at a planning board meeting or another zoning board meeting for another workshop.
Great. Looking forward to it. Truly do enjoy working with you folks.
All right, thank you, Jim. Have a good evening.
So,
Take care.
you too.
That is all we have on our agenda this evening.